as I'm applying color to her roots, section by section, I notice her watching me in the mirror. My client has a particular look about her when she's about to say something, whether I want to hear it or not. She says, "Yvette, you're such a smart, dynamic, capable woman." So, I laugh like I always do and try to turn the conversation back to her. But she doesn't let me. She said, "I mean it. I don't say things that I don't mean." This makes me uncomfortable, so I just keep applying her color so I don't have to say anything.
The Original Self Podcast.
Hey, it's Yvette. Today I want to talk about how other people's belief in us can help us build self-efficacy at any age or any time in our lives. Although I began with one particular exchange, this episode is really about a pattern I have actually witnessed across several long relationships behind the chair. Accepting a compliment, as you could tell, has never been one of my more developed skills. I can explain it away, definitely make a joke about it, or quickly find something nice to say about the other person in return. Anything that keeps the attention from resting on me for too long. But I know that some part of me does hear the compliment. I think some part of me has always heard them. Over the years, clients have watched me open salons, return to college later in life, and even start this podcast. I didn't feel confident through it all, obviously. I questioned almost every new step, sometimes repeatedly, and with great creativity. Their belief didn't remove my doubt. It just kind of sat beside it. And a lot of times that was enough to keep me moving. I feel lucky. Many people in my life have said kind things to me. The clients have told me, I'm talented. Friends have encouraged me and have even suggested that I write a book. I don't know about that one. The point is, it's always nice to hear, but a lot of it disappears. But there are certain voices that stay with me. I was thinking about that the other day, wondering why some words become the ones we hear when, let's say, we're standing at the edge of something new or just trying to decide if we're capable of doing it. I don't know, maybe it's because for me, the people saying them, they've never offered one of those inspirational wall plaques sayings that you would find at Home Goods. Maybe for your beach house, right? Life's a beach. Be sure to smile. Those exact slogans were actually hanging on the wall of a beach house my family and I had rented. And of course, we had fun mocking them all weekend. But anyway, back to what I was saying. The clients whose words stay with me, I believe, have been paying attention. They knew the version of me who had not yet returned to school, and then the version who eventually graduated. They had asked questions and listened while I constantly talked myself out of things. And then they watched me eventually do some of them anyway. They had seen the confident decisions and the decisions I made while feeling anything but. Their belief came from years of paying attention to who I was becoming. And I think that makes a difference of what stays with us. There is a psychological concept called mattering. At its simplest, mattering is the feeling that we occupy a meaningful place in someone else's life. That they notice us, that our experiences are actually registering with them. And therefore, we trust that we're not interchangeable or invisible to them. I didn't have a name for it at the time. I just knew that when they said something, I believed it more than when other people did. Their encouragement of me, toward me, carried the weight of all those years they had spent paying attention. When I first returned to school, I had to take statistics. I was totally convinced I would fail. I had always believed that I'm horrible at math. And I mean, it's not only a belief, okay? There's actual evidence demonstrating how little I understand it. So, with that well-established story about myself, I knew I'd fail the class. One long-term client told me about taking statistics in college. She joked that her professor finally passed her just to get her out of the class. And because she struggled so much with the materials, she was always the first person waiting outside his office, ready with more and more and more questions. She kept telling me, if I can pass, you can pass. She encouraged me to ask as many questions as possible and to believe that I could make it through the class. I seriously watched countless hours of YouTube tutorials. I called my brother more times than he cared to count. And I even tried getting my tech clients to explain problems to me. It didn't really help much. I wrote so many emails to my professor. I'm pretty sure she went home and had a drink to relax just because of my emails. But I did pass. And I'm pretty sure my client's belief didn't pour confidence into me simply because she said, nice things. I think it just made failure feel less inevitable. It gave me enough room to believe that success was still possible, even if it was just a little bit. So that belief of success still being possible comes from a term that psychologist Albert Bandura used. It's called self-efficacy. And it describes a person's belief that they can organize themselves and take actions for what the situation requires. It's not the belief that you'll succeed at everything, or positive thinking, or pretending fear is not there. It just disappears. It is, though, the belief that you can engage with what's in front of you. You can try, adjust, and keep going. Bandura argued that self-efficacy influences whether we begin, how much effort we invest, and how long we persist when something becomes difficult. When our self-efficacy is stronger in particular areas, we are more likely to treat setbacks like information. When it's weaker, we may treat those same setbacks as proof that we shouldn't even try. Bandura identified 4 main sources of self-efficacy. The first is a mastery experience. This is the evidence we gather by doing something. For me, finishing statistics without perishing was a mastery experience. Not because I suddenly understood the material. I still don't, really. But a year later, in research methods class, my professor asked a statistics question. I rattled off the answer like I actually knew what I was talking about, with the same unearned confidence as that scene in Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion when Lisa Kudrow's character, Michelle, explained how she supposedly invented Post-it note glue. And she threw out real chemistry terms that she clearly didn't understand, but she remembered them. When I answered my professor's questions, I was completely shocked that I remembered anything. And I must have had like a very funny look on my face because the professor started laughing and said, "Oh, good job, Yvette." That's a mastery experience because I did the thing that I was certain I couldn't do. And I came out the other side with proof instead of just a theory. Proof is different from encouragement. Encouragement's someone else's words. Proof is mine. So is surviving a mistake and discovering that we can recover from that mistake. Like it's not going to destroy us. I think difficulty doesn't prove that we're incapable. When we adapt and keep going and complete something that we weren't sure we could do, that creates the evidence that we can handle more than what we first believed. The second source of self-efficacy is a vicarious experience. This happens when we watch someone that we identify with do something, and then we begin to imagine that it may be possible for us to do it as well. This is why I became a life coach. One of my clients was also a life coach, and I would hear about the classes that she led or the seminars that she led, and watching her do it, I started to imagine myself doing it. I thought, oh, I could do this. I like this. Watching someone we relate to succeed can strengthen our belief in what is possible for us. We don't even have to know them personally. It can be a public figure, someone we encounter in a biography, or even an athlete that we admire. How many kids watch Steph Curry make his trick shots and then go outside and practice because seeing him do it makes them believe that it's possible for them too. Who we admire can show us possibility we hadn't even previously imagined for ourselves. The third source is social persuasion. So this happens when someone credible tells us they see ability in us. Obviously, their words don't prove that we can do the task, but they make us, like hearing those words, make us maybe not quit before we collected our own evidence. But there's a caveat. The person encouraging us has to be believable. It can't be generic cheerleading. Like, oh, that's so good. Oh, great. Good job. Like, it can be a little bit of that, but it can't just be super generic. And they can't barely know us because it doesn't carry that much weight. Specific, repeated belief from someone who's watched us over a long period of time, it works differently. My thesis professor knew exactly how many nervous breakdowns working toward a deadline would produce. He also knew how much it was going to produce in me because he watched them happen over and over. So every so often, he'd remind me how far I'd come and that if I just stayed the course, I'd succeed. It worked because he had earned the right to say it. Even though I'm rocking in the corner, he knew what to say to me to pull me out of that. The fourth and final source is our physiological and emotional state. So a racing heart. A racing heart can mean, I can't handle this. Or it can mean, this matters to me and my body is getting ready to respond. So the sensation's the same. Both of those reasons, both of those excuses, both of those states are a racing heart. Maybe you feel it in your throat, But what changes is the meaning we give it, which changes what we'll do next. I once turned a woman who had like Arctic white blonde hair. I turned her roots the color of orange. I mean like the kind you pick off a tree in Florida. Not kidding. So orange. When I saw that they were orange, I began to absolutely panic. Like my heart started racing, my mouth went dry. All logic completely left my brain. I applied a treatment to her hair, walked away to let my pulse slow down. A couple of hours later, her hair was back to the white she loved, and all was well. I mean, I'm pretty sure I lost a few years of my life from the panic, but everything else, it worked out. The point is that when I consider my own self-efficacy today, I realize the belief my clients express was a form of social persuasion. Their words couldn't substitute for my effort, but they helped me stay engaged long enough to build mastery of my own. Returning to school, graduating, and earning my credential gave me evidence. Producing the first podcast episode, then the 5th, and eventually the 27th gave me evidence. People's belief in me also helped me in situations where the challenge wasn't learning how to do something. It was recognizing that I still had the power to take action. Psychologists use the term problem-focused coping. That describes directing our attention toward the parts of a stressful situation that we can influence. Instead of remaining overwhelmed by the entire problem, we gather information, identify our options, and then choose a practical next step. When I was opening up my own salon, I ran into problems getting the necessary building permits because the building wasn't up to code, but my lease stated that it was. The landlord completely denied responsibility and then tried to frighten me into paying for the improvements that would be required to get the permits. This landlord owned, what seemed like half of the downtown area. He owned all the commercial buildings. They had an endless stream of money and an attitude to match. Unfortunately, the landlord's son was my contractor. I didn't know contractors. I knew he was a contractor, so I hired him. Good one. He continued asking me for payments without ever moving the project forward. He told me every time I would ask, why are you not doing this, whatever, he told me that the city wouldn't give the building permits because my plans were incorrect. Something was wrong with them. He neglected to mention that the real problem was their building. I think he was trying to get around the permit guy. I confided in one of my clients about what was happening. And I told her, I don't think it's too late to back out of this. I want out of the contract and I knew I would lose all the money that I invested, but I don't know. Quitting felt easier. This client reminded me that I did know how to speak to people, ask questions, and get answers. She convinced me I could walk into that city's planning department and find out what was actually happening. In my memory, the planning department was open from approximately 8 a.m. to 8:01 a.m. on the fourth Tuesday of a leap year. It was such a narrow window, and there were so many businesses waiting for building permits. But my client's confidence in my ability pushed me to go there despite how intimidated I actually felt. And that's where I discovered that my plans were perfectly fine. In fact, the permits weren't issued solely because the building was non-compliant with accessibility codes, ADA codes, even though in my contract it says that it was. So once I had the documented proof in my hands, my brother and I summoned our ancestral roots and went to the mattresses. I'm kidding. We did confront the landlord and we made them bring the building up to code at no expense to us. the point of this story is my client didn't solve the problems for me, right? She helped me recognize that I still had agency within it. Once I gathered the facts, I could respond from evidence instead of intimidation. But there's a deeper lesson, not only about what their belief gave me, but as my own evidence grew, my attention shifted toward the clients who offered that belief so freely. Because many of them had spent much of their lives being the people that everyone else relied on. Their stories showed me another side of what it means to be capable. Over the years, I've met several women who learned to become capable very early in their lives. Some were the oldest children in very large families. Some grew up moving around and, place to place or adjusting to instability. Many became skilled at noticing what everyone else needed before asking what they needed themselves. I think those qualities served them well. They became very dependable friends, attentive mothers, dedicated teachers, and always the person their families called when something went wrong. But I've also watched what happens when the strong one becomes overwhelmed. I have sat with clients where their spouses or loved ones have become seriously ill. I've watched them manage appointments, absorb frightening information, support the rest of their family, and all the while continuing to function while carrying fear that people rarely see. Their stories were different, but I noticed a shared belief beneath many of them. I'm the one who handles things. I'm the one who helps. I'm not the one who needs. Psychologically, self-reliance can begin as an adaptive response. It helps us function when other people depend on us. But a strength becomes restrictive when we no longer feel permitted to respond in any other way. Keeping that in mind, research on help seeking has found that a strong preference for self-reliance can actually prevent people from seeking psychological support. Sometimes it isn't that they believe asking for help is wrong. It's that they just simply have difficulty believing that the same permission they give everyone else applies to them. And then for some whose identity was organized around being capable, receiving help can almost feel like breaking a contract. Who am I if I can't manage this alone? What happens if I become the person asking instead of the one answering? Will people still see me as strong? I don't know. Perhaps strength also includes knowing when to stop performing invulnerability. I've watched some of these women that I'm talking about make a different choice, though. They accepted help from family and friends. Some did seek professional support. They let another person listen without immediately turning the conversation back to everyone else. Accepting support didn't make these women less capable or less generous or less dependable. It did, however, allow them to include themselves among the people worthy of care. I have spoken about self-compassion in blogs and other podcast episodes, and I've also mentioned psychologist Kristin Neff. Her work is all about self-compassion, and she describes it through 3 connected elements. Self-compassion consists of self-kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity. So self-kindness means responding to ourselves with care rather than judgment when we're struggling. Mindfulness means acknowledging what we're experiencing without suppressing it or allowing it to become our whole story. And then common humanity means recognizing that struggle and needing support are a part of being human. I think common humanity is especially important for people who are accustomed to being the strong one. They readily recognize when others need care. The harder part is allowing themselves to need it too. For some of my clients, self-compassion has meant accepting the meal someone offered or letting a family member take over an appointment. Sometimes it's seeking support from a therapist or working with a life coach. Or admitting, and sometimes for the first time, that I can't carry all of this alone. I have watched clients reach a point where what they were carrying became too heavy to conceal any longer. They would sit in my chair and begin talking. It's not about their hair or the ordinary events of the week, but about everything that had been accumulating inside of them. Their voices would sound even and controlled until suddenly they weren't any longer. And when I noticed that change, I'd sit down in the chair next to them and listen. Often they would start with an apology. People do that when they have learned to treat their pain as an inconvenience to others. I made sure that they knew I never saw it that way. I know when they were speaking honestly about what they were carrying, that was an act of self-kindness. Allowing themselves to experience the exhaustion without turning it into proof that they had failed was mindfulness. And recognizing that needing help didn't separate them from everyone else, that was common humanity. People who cared about them had often been waiting for the opportunity to help. Receiving that care required them to trust that their needs would not make them less capable or less worthy of respect. That kind of shift doesn't happen once and then stay finished. It's a practice. We have to choose it again and again whenever the weight becomes heavy. I know that because it's true for me too. Not only for when I was asking for help, but when trusting someone else's belief in me before I ever had it myself. I also think we sometimes misunderstand how people influence us. We assume the people who change our lives are the ones who gives us exactly the right advice at exactly the right time. But often they're the ones who give us a more accurate reflection of ourselves. Because those relationships were grounded in honesty, my clients' belief in me helped me develop my own. Their encouragement supported me without making me dependent on their approval. And then also through their lives, my clients taught me something else. They taught me that the generosity we offer other people eventually has to include us too. Neither lesson requires anyone to fix us. And neither asks us to feel completely confident before we act. So here's what I'm taking with me. Self-efficacy grows through action, not through waiting until we feel ready. Problem-focused coping turns a sense of helplessness into a practical question. What part of the situation can I influence? Credible belief from another person helps us remain in the experience long enough to get our own proof. And self-compassion expands our understanding of strength to include receiving support. So when that ugly little voice of doubt starts talking in my head, instead of asking it to shut up, maybe the question I should ask is, Why am I treating doubt as the only credible voice in the room? So this week, I'd like to ask you to try something. Try to offer one person a specific reflection based on something you've genuinely observed about them. Something like, I've watched how you keep going when something is difficult. Or, you ask really thoughtful questions. Or maybe, I see how much courage this is taking for you. And then try this. The next time someone offers support, practice receiving it fully. Pause long enough to let the help land before deciding what you owe them. Pay attention to which is more natural, offering the support or receiving it. That answer can possibly tell you something about the role you've learned to play. In closing, I just want to say that clients have reflected strengths in me that I wasn't yet ready to recognize. I've also watched capable people discover that accepting support doesn't diminish who they are. I still deflect compliments. I still laugh, change the subject, or question whether I've earned the words. But I'm slowly learning to let those words land and trust that they just might be true. Like I said, slowly learning. The best part is that self-efficacy doesn't require doubt to disappear. You can still hang on to it. It just means that doubt no longer gets to make every decision. Sometimes another person sees enough possibility in us to help us take that next step. Sometimes our role is to offer that belief. And sometimes our work is to receive it. I'm Yvette Dakota, and if this story resonates with you and you'd like to contact me, all of my information is in this episode's notes. Thank you for listening to the Original Self podcast, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
The Original Self Podcast.